Hey all, welcome to another video on Ruby on Rails / JavaScript. So this is kind of a hybrid tutorial, I guess I'd say. The gist is I want to implement or have wanted to implement drag and drop uploads using Rails, Ruby on Rails and active storage. And to do that, there's some, edge cases you have to go through to get that to actually work seamlessly. And what I ended up doing is leveraging a new framework that on the Rails kind of community side called Stimulus.js, but also a plugin that's called Dropzone.js, and combine that with active storage, and I'm able to drag and drop images I'm just using a post as the resource type here, in such a way that, you can drag and drop as you would maybe on Dropbox or something like that. So there's a lot of going on behind the scenes, but let me show you what I mean. So say you create a new, whatever it is, post or account, user, whatever you want to do on Rails. It's the typical CRUD path. So we got posts, new, and this would be on like the new form. And the big catch here is we're using active storage. So I have in the model a active storage method that hooks into this field called feature image. And from feature image, we're doing some JavaScript rendering to target this div that's wrapping this file field that's behind the scenes. Right now it's displayed hidden because we still need the field, but we're kind of optimizing it for drag and drop ability. If that's a word or not, I'm not sure. But needless to say, it ends up being something pretty neat to deal with regards to file handling. So with Dropzonejs, I'm able to actually hook into the drag and drop native API of the browser, but add in some bells and whistles. So that's what that library is used for in such a way. And you can kind of target maybe even the file size, the naming conventions, etc. I do have allowed file types here, but that's not necessarily something I actually implement in this video, but it is something with the 2 megabit size is a restraint, but that's all customizable. So the point of this video is to create this reusable component that's available to us using Stimulusjs, and then having a drag and drop concept in our app, no matter where we want it. And no matter, what resource we introduce. So this could be applied to other models, to other places in the app, depending on the form and everything in use. So I'll get into more Stimulus stuff. I think this is the first I'm talking about it on this channel and my blog. It's basically a front-end framework, but it's lighter and less invasive as something like Vue.js or React.js. So it doesn't completely rewrite your front end. Instead, it actually takes pieces of your existing front end. So Rails is basically known for being a server-side rendered app. The views itself, it hooks into and then, kind of focuses in on that component depending on what you target, and does things that you need with JavaScript. So it's a nice library. We'll get into a little more how it works, but definitely I won't cover everything because there's just too much. But definitely check that out. But the gist of this, you probably want to see this happen. So here we have a drag and drop. There's a little styles going on. There's some class names and stuff going on. But the Dropzonejs takes this file, adds this nice UI around it. You can remove it at any time and stuff too. So that's pretty neat. So I'll add that one. I think this one will go ahead and say the file's too big. We set a 2 megabit maximum, so this will go ahead and basically make you delete it before returning the form. That's all to say. If you create a new post, my second post, and I'll get some just dummy text for now. Create that, and it should display. It redirects to the show view just like normal on a Rails app. And with that, we get our actual post and everything outlined. Head back to the front end. It looks like I have an error in the index, which I'll fix, but basically we just render this in such a way that's going to repeat in the card fashion. So I guess ignore my error there, but that's essentially it. So I just wanted to show how to actually accomplish this, get that drag and drop functionality going in, and possibly not make it look this janky. So that more to come, so stay tuned. Okay, so to kick things off, I'm going to create a new Rails app with some predefined constraints around it already. I'm already in that kind of demo app, but I want to go ahead and go further with what we're doing and create a new app that has the configuration we need. And I am going to use my kickoff Tailwind template. It just saves me time. You're welcome to not use it. But there is parts of this tutorial that are going to leverage some of the stuff I've had, like Tailwind inside of that, or devise and whatnot, just to have that kind of Railsy concept going on no matter what we're doing. So I'm going to cd into my sites. I'm going to create a new app, and we're going to say Rails new, and I'll call it active storage. So, sorry for the long ass name, but drag and drop. I like to be descriptive. And I'll pass my template. So the typical, you pass -m to do that. I have it locally. So if you haven't, you'll want to clone that down from the GitHub repo I'll link to, and just either reference it how I am or the direct template file within the folder. You can do this however you want to, but I called it Tailwind or Kickoff Tailwind. And then inside that folder, it's in the same folder as I'm actually creating this app right now. Is the template.rb. So I've done this quite a few episodes or tutorials in the past, but there's more you can pass on this. You can make probably like almost a paragraph worth of options here if you want to on a new Rails app, but we'll just go as light as possible. So the main one I want to add that I don't normally do is Webpack, and then equals Stimulus. So this will go out and fetch the Stimulusjs library. Once the Rails app is installed, it'll do the whole yarn install of that, and then actually set up the app to use Stimulus right away. A lot of this configuration takes more time, so passing this flag sets that up and does a lot for us from the get-go, which is really nice. So I'll show you what I mean when I run this, so give it a sec. Okay, so the app was successfully created. It did install a ton of stuff, but what's great is how much it did automatically. So using my template, again, you don't have to. Devise is set up. We innovated this from the ID slug, so it just kind of works. There's still some stuff to do with that, but it's hearsay. Tailwind setup comes from stock, and then I also added the Webpack installation of Stimulus. So what I want to do is cd into the active storage, drag and drop, and I'll open this in my code editor, literally called code. And the key thing here to note that isn't the norm, I guess you could say, is the JavaScript folder now has a controllers folder. And this concept with Stimulus is that there is kind of like the Rails model where it's MVC framework. So there's a model view controller. So the controllers in the JavaScript act as the controllers here. So you can think of it as such. Obviously the syntax is different. We're using modern ES6 with Webpack, so we're allowed to do a lot of this stuff that makes it all fancy dancy. But in the end, we're importing all this into our application JS file, which is getting rendered in our layout file, if you recall. So we have this application JavaScript pack tag. So what's going on in the controllers is the importing of Stimulus itself, and then some Stimulus Webpack helpers to get it to work with Webpack. We create an application and then give it the context where we basically say all the controllers in this folder should get imported into the application itself. So it's a fancy way of saying take everything in here that has the namespace underscore controller, as you can see here, this comment, and then import it in here so you don't have to do each one directly. Now you could, but it's already done for you out of the box, so that's just one thing to understand. Aside from that, getting Stimulus rolling requires some front-end stuff to happen, so you have to actually create some data attributes on some elements in your views. And we'll get into that, but I wanted to just show you, the big gist of what Stimulus adds to the pack. Aside from that, all my other stuff's here, the Tailwind CSS stuff, and so on and so forth. So we don't have any resources yet, so no models or anything, but we'll add that soon. I'm just going to make a generic post type of post just to give you some context of what we're actually doing. So one other dependency we need is called Dropzone.js, and it's just a node module that we can import. We'll do that when we create what I'm going to call a Dropzone underscore controller From there, we can import this library directly instead of just globally. So it's kind of one of those things that you need it when you need it, but you don't when you don't. So what I want to do is add that dependency now with Yarn. So it won't be a Ruby gem or anything like that. This is all modern ES6 stuff, JavaScript stuff. So we'll say yarn add drop zone. It'll go find that. And I'll show you, I guess I can pull up Dropzonejs, give you an idea of what this actually is. It's essentially just a way to hook into the already drag and drop API of a given modern browser, but give it more stuff to do. There's a lot of events you can hook into and whatnot just to kind of do things on the fly, make things fancy, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty straightforward. This is the current dummy app. What I want to do is basically get rid of that and start from scratch. So one final thing to do, we have active storage support by default, but we need to still install the migration that will basically handle the new attachments and I think with Rails 5.2, I think active storage came around, and what it does is creates a separate table from your own models, like posts, for instance, and stores your images or files or whatever over there instead, and you can always reference it from your models. So I no longer need to add like a post with an image field. So that just, it's understood. So I'll give you more context with that in a second. But what we need to run now is Rails active storage install. Should just create a migration file for us. There it is. I copied this active storage migration file. I'll give you a context of that real quick. Migrate folder, here it all is. So it creates a table, active storage blobs and attachments, adds some data around those, and then we just are able to use it within our app already to, fix up or add attachments how we please just by declaring it in our models. It's really cool. So I'll show you that in a second, but first we need to migrate everything since that's a new migration. So we'll say Rails DB migrate. Schema looks a little different, but should be all set up. We have active storage, our friendly ID stuff I mentioned. We already have a user model since my template kind of includes that and ran that automatically. So that's a nice thing to have already set up with devise, of course. So now let's actually generate what we're going to be storing on. So the post, like I showed in the example here, is the concept. So I'll just do a generic post, like a blog post. So let's do that next. So I'll have to clear that. I'll say Rails generate. I'm just going to scaffold it because it's quick. So I'll say post for the actual resource or model in this case. Title will be a string, or you could say just title and the default string. Will just be descriptive there. Body will be text. Now we could get into action text too. That's new to Rails. You wouldn't even need to add this if you wanted to do that. But I'm just going to leave it as a basic one. And then since I have a user model, why not do user references? So this adds a user ID attribute to the post table and adds an index on that as well. We need a plural there. It also adds belongs to user on the post model when it gets generated. So we'll go ahead and add that and create that real quick. Two things I already wanted to delete are these files here. So I'll go ahead and just jump in and delete those fast. We're using Tailwind, so we don't need any aspect of these files. So it's not a big deal to delete those. Scaffolds kind of conflicts, so I just want to get rid of it. Okay. Now in our models, you'll see the post belongs to user. The user has many posts, so we should probably have that. Cool. And that should be it for the model side of this equation. There's really not a lot to add other than one attribute we'll need to add for active storage. So let's do that coming up. But first I want to point out, if I were to go start the server, Rails S, I'll go to my post path or localhost. Well, we still need to migrate. Go ahead and run those migrations. Okay, here's my basic template. I have that post concept already scaffolded, but it's behind, a URL we need to find. So I can already access this fine, as well as the new, which, if you didn't care about authentication, that wouldn't be a problem. But since we've already got devise set up and everything on my template, I'll go ahead and implement that. So all I need to do is modify our controller just a tad to have it before action. And we'll say authenticate user with a bang, and then we'll just say accept show and index. So basically let the user visit show and index, but no other path. And I'm going to delete these comments. We need to assign the user to a new post when it gets created. So this is, as the more you do Rails apps, the more you're going to just know some defaults to already add to your app. We have a permitted parameter of user ID, title, and body, which is good. That's what we need. But when we do create a post, I still need to assign it to a user somehow. So instead of just doing the current user dot whatever, a quick and easy way is just to say the same instance of that post ID, or user ID, excuse me, can be the current user dot ID. So we'll basically just inject that as the post, and then it'll save and then have that ID referenced. So hopefully that makes sense. So we're creating a new post with these parameters that get passed through from the form. We're grabbing that instance of post. Since this is an instance variable, we're getting that user ID attribute on it and then just assigning it to the current user ID. So whoever's logged in at this point, because they're going to be the ones creating that post, and we just want that history of them creating it in the database. Okay, so that's kind of an aside, not necessarily the target of this tutorial, but I just kind of like to be thorough. On top of this all, we have our post form rendering. We see our authentication is working now, so I actually need to sign up first, so I'll do that. Okay, so now we can get to that view. The problem is that form looks like trash, so let's go ahead and create more styles around that. We have Tailwind already set up in the app if you have my template and use that. So all we need to do is kind of reference some of these form styles you see inside the components folder. So we have in like an input class and focus, label, etc. So I'm going to just go to the view and do that real quick. So we've got a little bit going on here now, at least. Let's go ahead and beef up the new and edit views though too. I'm going to get rid of this. Still, if we go to the root path, we're still stuck on that home controller though. So while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and update our routing. If you go to config routes and just change this home index to post index and use the right quotations. There we go. Cool. So this should, if you refresh, should redirect to post index. And we go to our new. Very good. So our index, I'm going to actually check out. I'll get the views working and then we'll come back. So I'll go and do this real quick. I'm going to just do it from scratch. So I have some markup here, and with it, we just have a basic heading that says this is the index of posts. You can create a new post if you're signed in. We're doing that if check there, that conditional. Then we're looping through all the posts in a Flexbox layout, and there's an article that's going to be output for each post. Within each post, we'll render the title and then the feature image if there is one, and then the post.body. Then we're checking here. I've often extracted this into like a helper, but you can say if basically the person authored the posts, they're able to edit, but no one else. So we'll have these edit and delete buttons if so, and so on and so forth. So this should render fine. It just won't have anything to do yet because there's nothing to render. So what I want to do now is add the concept of our basic drag and drop attachment to the form. So that's going to involve part of what gives ActiveStorage so much of its charm. We'll go back to the post model. And all we need to add is has one attached feature image. And I'm calling it feature image. You can call it whatever you want. This is essentially saying this model expects one attachment called this on the form. So when we go back to our view, we can add that field now. That's all thanks to ActiveStorage, so we don't have to do much setup on the database level, which is great, and always kind of a constraint when dealing with stuff like that. So I'm thankful for ActiveStorage for sure. So what we need to do that's different here though is instead of like a text area like I have, it should be a form file field. And this should be fine. We just need to change this to feature image. Cool. So this will render it fine. It'll look just like a traditional file field though, and that's okay if you want that basic UI. This whole point of this though is drag and drop. So we'll get into more of that in a second. The fact that this does require a file now means the form needs to be multi-part. So we'll say multi-part true here, and the options for the form width. So that should be square in terms of setup, I think. Except one gotcha, it always gets me, is remembering to whitelist that field. Since we added a new one, we need to whitelist it in our controller. So we'll say feature image on the post params method. So don't forget to do that one, or it will not save to the database when you do pass it through. So now we need to basically modify some markup around this to get our Stimulusjs to work and the Dropzonejs stuff to work too. So that adds some complexity for sure, but I think it's possible. So let's go ahead and render the label like normal. What we want to do around the field itself though is render a new div. It's going to be what Stimulus actually looks for. So you can often find Stimulus components based around a data attribute that gets passed. But before we do that real bit, I'm going to add some Dropzone components, or class names, excuse me. Dropzone default, DZ clickable. These are all options from the Dropzone library that allow it to get styled and stuff, or add certain classes given the action going on. So say you're dragging something or dropping something, you can hook into those with different styling or event listeners and whatnot. So on this div, like I mentioned, if you're looking for a Stimulus component in a Rails app or any app in particular, you can probably find it by this data property. So I'm going to call this drop zone. So the convention here is if you have a data controller, that's a cue for Stimulus to go find a controller in your JavaScript folder. Let me go back to that controller. So we need one here called Dropzone since we named it Dropzone. So let's go ahead and create that. So it'll be Dropzone controller.js. Now you can generate these on the command line too if you want, just using a traditional generator like Rails has. So up to you if you want to do that. I find it's just as easy to make them myself. There is some boilerplate setup with these though, so we'll get to that. On top of this, we have the Dropzone attributes, which will basically be options you can pass through on the front end that allows this to be really reusable. So I can set a max file size or max files allowed on the drag and drop instance. So say we only want one to begin with, we can go ahead and set that up. Or we can set the, of course, file size first. So data max file size will be one I create, 2. And that's going to stand for 2 megabytes. And then data Dropzone max files is equal to 1. Basically saying I only want one file to be actually attached here. So on top of that, the field itself needs some attributes. So we've got our class already. I'm going to get rid of that. And we'll just say direct upload true. And that basically says part of active storage comes with some JavaScript that allows for a direct upload component to be imported into your app if you want. And that just basically says you can go ahead and directly upload with an action or event instead of having to do the whole submission on the form with a button or a submission click. So we'll get into more of that. But the data target on this will be Dropzone.input. Bundled with Stimulus is also this concept of targets. So this will end up returning in the view just like this data dash whatever. This is just the Rails way of rendering it. So whenever you need to render a data attribute, you can do this on actual Rails elements. That said, you notice it says Dropzone.input. And that basically says, okay, this target's going to go to the Dropzone controller, and there's going to be an input target within this controller coming up. And I'll show you that in a second. So it basically just says it hooks into that. In traditional JavaScript, you're doing all this querying. This is that way of doing it automatically, so you don't have to do document.query list, query selector, all those things. It just, you get that for free with this framework. So I'll get into more of that. Let me just get the markup here sorted. Dropzone MSG, DZ message, needs click, text gray. I just threw this on to make it look a little nicer. 600 for Tailwind. And within that will be a couple of just general messages you might see in a drag and drop. So that's all the markup around the element itself. We still, if we refresh the view, we're not going to see the file field, but we'll see just kind of some broken styles, which is fine. We do see the file field, but it's because we need JavaScript to actually work its magic still. I'll be referencing some helpers in the app for JavaScript, and I like to basically make these reusable in any way I can. So instead of putting those in the main controller, we're going to put those in a separate file in a helpers directory. And then I'll do an index.js there. That index.js allows me to import it into other files very easily. So what I'll do is make a few functions. Feel free to speed this up, but I'm going to export each of them, which allows me to import each independently. It's just a nice ES6 Webpack thing that we get to do for free now with Webpacker. So bear with me. All right, this all might look confusing, but it's essentially just wrapping up some logic into some methods so I don't have to think about this stuff or add it to other parts of the app that are complex already. So it's just a way to extract that into one-liners in a sense. So we've got stuff like for finding elements, or this is just doing basically a query selector, getting a meta value of whatever meta name, and so forth. So we'll use these in the Dropzone controller next, which is the main meat and potatoes of this app. So since I've already added Dropzone, if you recall from Yarn, I can import it directly from that node module. So I'll do that. So let's say Dropzone from Dropzone. And I have this little plugin that calculates the size, which is not too terrible. So import controller from Stimulus. Kind of need to do this every time we add a new controller. And finally, import direct upload from, oops. We're going to input the Rails active storage node module This doesn't come automatically, so we'll have to actually import it for this to work. And that's how we get that direct upload thing that is on the front end. So quite a few dependencies. It can add up in terms of file size, so I guess to each his own there. But I'm also going to import those helpers we just exported. So we can say, you can destructure those to get them in by each one we want. So in a case, I'm going to go for quite a few. And that's going to look through that folder and just know to import the index.js, which is kind of the convention. So if you see an index.js, you don't have to actually type it, though it will still work. Really cleans up the way of adding dependencies to some sort of scripting element you need. Okay, so the meat and potatoes of an actual Stimulus controller looks like this. So export default class extends controller, and we're referencing controller here. We get that from Stimulus. So we're basically creating a new controller each time. Then there are some static targets. You can throw a static flag and then say targets in front. And the way this works, again, I would reference the documentation to get a better presented case for Stimulus. But since we have on the front end a target.input, that same name applies in the target here. So the controller already knows, since its file name is Dropzone_controller, that this is correlating to this JS, this whole class is correlating to the same controller on the front end in the view, since it's called data controller dropzone. So it's going to know this convention of finding the dropzone_ naming convention, and just know that that's what this connects to. So we'll inside that controller, which is all wrapped here, notice the div wraps everything we need, we can find the input target. So that's where this target comes from. And you can access the target in helpful ways that are conventions as well. So I'll show you some of those in a second. So we could say, since the name is called input, we can actually access it later as input target. That's just the convention. You add target to the mix. So that might be confusing, but if you use Stimulus and or are interested, I definitely check out the documentations for a little bit more overview. Bundled with each class of the controller is a connect method. And it's basically once that thing mounts on the front end, this will fire. So consider that like an initializer method, maybe on a Ruby object. So we're going to say this .dropzone, which will be another method we add in a second. Create dropzone. And we'll pass in this, basically binding it to the class. This .hide file input gets rid of that actual UI we see that still has that browse button. And then this .bind events. And then I ran into an error. I think it's just the nativeness of turbolinks in Rails, but I'm going to pass this through just to see if it works still. I think it should be fine. So say auto discover false. It's a configuration there. So right now it won't actually do much because we need to define these methods. So this is referring to the class itself. If you were to console that, you could see such. Maybe I'll do that. See if it even renders. Probably going to get errors. Yeah. But we do get the object of the Stimulus controller, which is, as you can see, targeting this element itself. So that's all actually working as advertised, except for some of this stuff down here because we haven't finished. So let me go and do one more thing before I forget, and that is the styles around that Dropzone plugin. Now we can import those or serve another style sheet or something, but I actually found that just importing them from the node modules is just as easy. So I'm going to do that in our style sheets. So we can import from a node module in here since it's already kind of JavaScript rendered. So I'll say import to the Dropzone class. that'll apply. So we'll say it's some extra tailwind love. So border to give it a look and feel of a place you can drop something. Rounded, large, border gray 400, and border dashed. So all that's to say that we're going to import that stuff and hopefully not see errors with the styles, at least at this point. We'll see some dash lines. Yeah, there we go. So the JavaScript hasn't mounted, otherwise this would hide, but the tailwind and stuff is working there. If you're wondering where this actually comes from, since we installed those node modules, the Dropzone in particular, if you have a node module folder, you can go find the same path as you can see here. So Dropzone, I don't want to spend too much time doing this, but Dropzone is here. Inside that, we have a disk folder. Inside that, we have like a min and then the actual style sheets. So that's where it's all coming from. Once this ships, it'll get compiled down. So those things will already be in your CSS as opposed to in that node module. So you don't need to ship the node module itself, which would be terrible anyway. In this controller, we're going to do everything we can for the stimulus, and then we're going to create another class coming up that's going to be the direct upload class that we'll reference as well for active storage. Then combined, we'll have these necessary evils to get things to work the way we want. So let's handle the hide file input. And you can just create a new method on the class and say this dot input target. And again, that refers to this here. If you just add a camel case target to the mix, you get that for free. That's just essentially saying, almost like saying document that query selector, that input that is on the front end. So that's relating to this file field. So hopefully that's clear. We'll say disabled is true. And then this dot input target dot style dot display none. So saving that down, that should call that, and this should hide. And one quirk I want to add to the mix here is Webpack dev server. So this should open on that app. If we just run bin / Webpack dev server, this will do hot module reloading in the background. So you have your server up already on a Rails app, and then you just open a new tab and run this, and it'll compile in real time when you save. So when I save this down, it'll automatically refresh. So apparently that's not working still. I think it's because we still have errors for everything. Yeah. So we'll wait until all this code's in here, and then it should render as intended. Okay, then we have a bind events method. So this .dropzone, and it's camel case, on added file. And these events you can actually listen for, and then we could do a fat arrow function, set timeout, and we can do another timeout, or fat arrow function, I mean. So inside the timeout, we'll say file dot accepted, and create. So if file is accepted is basically what this is saying. Do the thing on the right. So create direct upload. And this will make more sense once we create this actual controller. We don't have that yet. And then we can do another one similar to this. Here's that remove element we imported. Makes a callback function. And that's going to be file.controller. So that refers to the controller the file is referencing. So in this case, our Dropzone controller. Okay, and then I know this might be a little advanced, but we're getting into the weeds here. So there's a concept of getters and setters in Stimulus, and the way you can get something kind of like document query is through the same thing. But we'll say get headers. We need to get this actual like form cross-site forgery tokens. So that comes in from the form itself. Or it's actually through the request, excuse me. So if you do like an AJAX response, this stuff should be in the mix. And then we could just say get meta value, since we have that as a helper now. Okay, so there's the first one there. There's quite a few of these. So let's say get URL, return this dot input target dot get attribute, data direct upload URL. And if that doesn't make sense, remember if we added that, because we added that data remote upload or whatever it is for active storage, we're able to see this direct upload, excuse me, attribute. It's kind of just an option to pass. You get these data attributes posted on the element as a result, and it just has the relative route or the path that this file will be uploaded, which will be the active storage direct uploads. So it's kind of just a resource for that to work as intended. So that's where this URL is coming from. And then we can do the same with get max files. So these are all data attributes on the item. So if you So let's do class direct upload controller. And this is just a basic ES6 class, so nothing too wild here. We don't need this bit though. But it is going to harness some of the stuff we need to kind of run this stuff in the background. So we need a constructor function. And you can pass in options from the front. So this is how you would do so. You could say like source and file. So that's what we're doing here. We'll say this dot direct upload equals create direct upload. And we'll say file source.url. And then that comes from, I believe, active storage. So let's go and set up some more. So this dot source equals source. And then this dot file equals file. This allows us to use it within the class, but it's also being passed in through the constructor method. So if you're not sure about constructor method and all that stuff, it's kind of just a syntax thing for ES6 classes, which are natively sugar over top of the prototype method in JavaScript. It's kind of more of an advanced thing in JavaScript, but it is a way to create new instances of things that are similar to classes, but the concept of classes don't really exist in JavaScript by default. ES6 makes it seem like they do though. So we'll say this.file.controller equals this, and then this.hidden_input equals this.create hidden input, and this.direct upload .create. Some of this comes from the active storage documentation attributes, and then we're going to do a fat arrow function to pass a function through. So we could say if error, remove the element this dot hidden input, this dot emit drop zone error, and then we'll pass in the error. I think I spelled that right. No, I didn't. Error. Wow, I can't spell. Error. Okay. And else this dot hidden input dot value equals attributes dot signed out, or signed ID, excuse me. It's part of the Ajax stuff. And then this dot emit drop zone success. Okay. All right, now we need these like create hidden input methods and stuff that don't exist at the moment. So let's do that. So we'll say const input, basically creating one on the fly. So if you've never done this with JavaScript, it's relatively straightforward, but kind of a pain in the ass. Now we're doing part of the Ajax stuff. So we'll say direct upload will store file with XHR. And we'll say XHR is actually the request. And then say this dot bind progress event. That's XHR. This dot emit drop zone uploading. Okay, and then here's those methods coming up. So bind progress event XHR. This dot XHR equals XHR. This dot it's XHR dot upload dot add event listener progress event, and this dot upload request did progress. And then we're calling that again. So upload request did progress event. So all these things are like sharing stuff, so I know it's probably confusing. This dot source dot element This is just basically setting that progress meter. This is, I think this stems from the active storage documentation. I just copied some of that in. Let's do find element. Make this easier to read by skipping new lines. DZ upload. And we can set a style on it. Dot width equals, do backticks and say progress. All right. And emit drop zone uploading. This dot file dot status equals drop zone dot uploading. This dot source dot drop zone dot emit processing. This dot file. So all these methods are coming through from this constructor we passed through here. We're running start. And then we get those elements to go ahead and run through all of this stuff. So drop zone success, we still need to create, but we're getting there. So I'm doing the methods that are going to be shared throughout those processes. So it's trying to make each method do as little as possible per method. So we'll say emit drop zone error, and then we have emit drop zone success. Okay, so on the error, we have uploading error. We're just going to be passed the error through. Notice we did that on this bit here. So we're basically coming back down to this method and hooking into that. So we have access to the file status equals. These are going to be relatively similar. We're just passing in different props. We're going to have functions that are actually what I'm talking about up here. So I said that we were creating that class there, and the create name does something. It actually doesn't. I was just forgetting that I had this at the bottom. So let's go and create that actual thing. It references that. It's just a more descriptive way of setting it up, is what I was trying to say. Upload controller, source, file. It's just a wrapper function around the return a new instance of this thing. So new direct upload controller source file. And then below that, we'll have one that's the create direct upload source, or excuse me, file URL controller. And we'll say return new direct upload. Notice that's what we actually imported from the beginning, which is part of active storage. And that's going to be the file URL controller. These are just more descriptive ways of saying new in a return statement, as opposed to throwing them right in line with your other work. And then finally, create drop zone. Pass in the controller and return the drop zone instance. So new drop zone controller.element. So it's going to refer to the target. Pass in an object of parameters. So URL is going to be controller.url. Notice these are all of our get methods. Headers, controller.headers, max files, controller max files. You get the idea. Okay, so with that, my hope is that things are working swimmingly on the front end. So I will go and see if we got any crazy errors. Meta, looks like I have a typo there. It's in our helpers. Meta name. Oh, forgot the equal sign. I think that's the gist of it. Yeah. Okay, so let's give this a whirl. I have a warning. No errors though. Okay, that's fine. So I'll grab an image. I've downloaded these prior to. One's oversized and one's just under the 2 megabyte limit. So I'll go ahead and grab that, drag it in. Doesn't look like it worked though. Let's see. Cancel upload attributes is not defined. Let's see if I have a typo on the controller. Typo. Yep, attributes right there. And one more try. This dot, it's not a function, looks like another typo. This happens all the time. Emit drop zone what was the actual, where was the error? Type error. Allow upload, requested upload. So it actually worked. 84. Let's see on line 84 for something here. Yeah. Emit is the word. One more try. Hey, it worked. All right, so let's just create a post. First post. And throw some text in there. Ugly, I know, but let's go ahead and create it. Obviously the show isn't up to speed, but the front should work. Looks like something didn't happen to save though, so let's double check. Oh, I need to actually render the image. That might help. Okay, so what's left to do on the index at this point, which I still need to do the show view, which I might just X from this video just to save some time, but we need to render that image path. So we called it image feature image, so we can say post.featureImage. Get rid of that text, and this should be rendering with any luck. Perfect. All right, so the show view, I'll actually just do a quick speed through that, and then we'll be on our way. One thing I added, you might have seen quickly, is just to check to see if the feature image is present. Maybe you don't have one. That's okay. If not, you would probably want to set up some validations in your model for that. I didn't go that far with this, but that's pretty simple to set up. So the show view looks pretty good. The front end of the index looks good. We can edit, we get the same drop zone stuff here. One caveat with this is that I can't re-render the actual attachment in this view. There's just some tough things to do with that regard. We'd actually have to go find that asset maybe on a third-party service, pull it in, and then update it on the fly again. So that you can see so many edge cases with it there, but you can update it still from this view if you want to. So with that, I hope they found this somewhat helpful. I know it was a lot of JavaScript logic to get working, but we're doing a lot in the background to get this up and running. The whole concept of it is to use Stimulus to kind of hook into the component itself, extend what Stimulus is capable of using the active storage import. We've added that actual direct upload attribute to the index, and from the target, we're able to listen for that event and do all the magic behind the scenes. That's all the Ajaxery and stuff needed to do some of the upload tactics behind the scenes with both Dropzone.js and active storage. So I know there's a lot to take in. Definitely check out the code. I'll link to it in the blog or on YouTube. And from there, feel free to extend it or use it and ask any questions you have. All right, guys. Thanks for now. Peace. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.